Welcome to the Ultimate Game Master's Guide for Ultimate Game Masters. Part 4. Prepping for your first session.
Alright, you got your books, you got your dice, and you're ready to play. But wait, what are you going to play? Are you going to stick with a pre-made adventure to offload some of your prep work? Or are you going to go all in and do it like a boss? If your answer is the former, you might want to take some time to figure out which adventure in particular you want to play and should discuss this with the players as well. Adventures and pre-made modules vary greatly both in D&D and other TTRPGs, so make sure you find something that both you and your group likes. If your answer is the latter, then congratulations boss, you just made the first step to being a great GM. TTRPGs are all about making your own world, and you should start making your first mistakes early so that your later sessions can improve in quality much faster. Doing it in this free-form fashion will make sure you improve at a quicker pace in this regard. If you're going to make your own adventure/campaign from scratch, you have to think about a couple of determining factors. Theme. What is the theme of your adventure? Is it a gritty and dark noir adventure set in the modern world? Or is it a fantasy world at the cusp of a great danger that's about to destroy it? Determining the theme this way will provide consistency and also help you figure out the starting point and scope of your entire adventure. Tone. The tone of the adventure determines not what the setting is, but how it is portrayed and relayed to the players. Figure out the keywords that would best fit the setting and how you wish to portray the adventure. If you're planning on a detective-style game, you would probably set a darker tone involving things like murder, deceit, and mystery, while a lighter tone could involve things like heroism, valor, and standing against a great evil if you're going for a more classic fantasy setting. Figuring out the tone will determine the general vibe behind the table and the nature of the quests and/or tasks that the party undertakes. Building the world. Once you have your setting and theme, you can start building your world or can take an existing world from lore that's already been established in the game. In other words, you can create your world from scratch, or you can take an already created world and figure out how much of it you want to include in your adventure. Doing the former won't be included in this guide due to the sheer amount of information needed, but I will link several guides on how you can accomplish this. Most RPG games have their equivalent of the Dungeon Master's Guide, which are full of information on how to build a world within that particular game, so make sure you find that equivalent and use it as a specific guide in this regard. Setting the stage. Once you determine the world you want the adventure to take place in, it's time to figure out where the adventure will start. When determining a starting location, I advise you to start simple. Don't overwhelm the players with a massive city full of hundreds of NPCs and several thousand years of lore dumped on their shoulders. Instead, start with a small, almost negligible location with only a couple of NPCs and flesh them out a bit more instead. You don't have to write a backstory for each NPC that details every year of their life, but just write a couple of paragraphs that will give the party an idea of what they're all about. You can always expand on their stories later if it becomes relevant, or if the party takes a particular interest in them. In addition to setting up a starting town, you should also design any sort of dungeons or similar locations if your adventure warrants them. The process on how to make these will be explained in the next parts of this video. Okay, so now you have an idea for your adventure, where it takes place, and a general idea on how it starts. Now it's time to put those ideas into practice. If you had a session 0, you already know about your players' preferences and you've already relayed your general idea of the adventure to them. Now, let's figure out what to do in order to actually prep the session. Bear in mind that as you become a more experienced GM, you will likely need less and less prep time as you'll be able to improvise many things on the fly. For now, let's focus on a few key things that you should always prep for, if possible. The initial presentation. A short, and I emphasize the word short, presentation of the world and the starting location. A couple of paragraphs is more than enough exposition for the beginning of the adventure, and droning on for half an hour of exposition will make sure the party becomes bored instead of excited for the game. Try to make the presentation short but interesting, narrow but hinting at bigger things to come. The main quest. I put the word main in parentheses because this isn't a video game. However, for your first session, you generally would want your players to complete a specific task. This is done as an introductory quest to the broader scope of the adventure and will set the trajectory for further quests in the adventure. As such, try to design the quest in a way that it doesn't break regardless of what your players decide to do, which includes even killing the quest giver or any related NPCs. How do you do this? Well, First, make sure that whatever the party is trying to achieve within the scope of the quest can also be achieved in different ways. A good MacGuffin for this is journals and notes or other NPCs that might have relevant information regarding the same quest should the original quest giver or an important NPC become compromised. Drawing the maps. While TTRPGs are considered theater of the mind, it is nice to provide at least a world map, a town map, or something that the party can use to orient themselves in the game world. When it comes to fleshing out designs for dungeons, you can choose to draw them yourself, and whether or not you wish to draw them for your players is up to your group's preferences. It is entirely possible to run a game without any maps of any kind, so you should determine how much time, if any, you wish to put into making such maps. In terms of design, however, I will relay a couple of key points for making a dungeon-like area. Number 1. Natural versus artificial design. What do I mean by this? Well, if you place things down in your dungeon solely for the sake of mechanical purposes, then the dungeon won't seem like it was built by NPCs, but by the GM instead. To avoid this, try to think about the nature of the dungeon and its purpose and how NPCs who built it would have placed its rooms. Make it seem logical whilst also finding ways of putting in things that the party might use in terms of treasure and items. Try to avoid making it seem too obvious that certain items were placed there just so they can take them. Make sure the design is connected, sensical in nature, and organic. 2. Crossroads. A good dungeon has many different crossroads which make the party contemplate on their next move and which path to take. Try to design paths this way so that there's always a straightforward path that any party can take, which may or may not be of a certain difficulty, and then design alternate paths which make the job easier but require certain skills to traverse without issues. For instance, you can have 3 paths lead to the central chamber, but one is laden with monsters, which could be the straightforward path, one is filled with traps, and one is partially collapsed. Designing paths this way gives your party choices on how to proceed, and you can also think of slightly different outcomes for choosing a specific path. For example, gaining an item that's located on an alternative path. 3. Use red herrings. The term red herring refers to something misleading that first appears to be true. For example, if your party is searching for a particular magical orb, you can have them find a different orb, which they then realize is the wrong one. Why do this? Because you can use red herrings in many different situations, either as traps, plot exposition devices, and mainly as a way to subvert expectations. I'll let you decide how to use each particular one, but it's a great way to add twists to your dungeon, and they can also be used in dungeon layouts. For example, a path that seems like the right one but leads somewhere else. That being said, don't overdo it when it comes to red herrings, as no one wants a dungeon that's got one at every turn. That's a sure way to turn your players into paranoid wrecks and make them feel like you're just toying with them as a GM. 4. Puzzles. Puzzles can either be fun little tests of intelligence and problem solving, or can turn into hair-pulling nightmares. Regardless, good puzzles are a fun way of making a room interesting if there are no other features in that room that make it stand out. They can also be used as barriers that prevent further progression if you want to make sure a certain area remains undisturbed until the party can solve the puzzle and proceed. Bear in mind that puzzles can also take the form of social interactions with NPCs. For example, solving a puzzle that the NPC relays to the party. Here, I will outline some key notes on making a good puzzle. A. It has to make sense. Just because you know the answer, it doesn't mean the players will. Make sure that the puzzle has some sort of internal logic that can help the players solve it. For example, if you have an elemental puzzle, you can have several pillars that each have a certain color: green, blue, white, and red. The players can then realize that each of these corresponds to the 4 elements of earth, water, air, and fire. From there, you can add clues on how the puzzle is solved just by using some general knowledge and perhaps some lore-related knowledge from the setting you are playing in. This is also a great way to relay some exposition of the game's world and history without making the party read through massive volumes of text. B. Add layers. Try to have the puzzle have several layers. What do I mean by this? In essence, try to make sure that the puzzle needs several steps in order to be solved. If the puzzle isn't a significant part of the dungeon's area, it can have only 2 or 3 steps, but if it's more significant, you can add additional steps as you please. Again, try not to overdo it in this regard. C. Alternate solutions. Try to make the puzzle open-ended enough so that it can be solved in different ways with different outcomes. If the puzzle is blocking the path to a very significant area you don't want the players to enter too soon, you can narrow down these solutions to only one, but otherwise try to encourage improvisation in this regard as well as player agency. For instance, if the party gets daunted by a pillar puzzle, they might just destroy it and have the pillar put a curse on the party for doing so before opening the path forward. 5. The final boss. Traditionally, a dungeon-like area usually has a boss-like NPC that's either holding the item or has the knowledge that the player is required to complete the mission. Despite this, you can still make it more varied by having the final boss not be an NPC at all. Instead, you can also use the environment or a puzzle that provides a certain challenge in order to complete the quest. If your party prefers more cerebral problem solving, you can do the latter. If not, stick with the former. Here, I will also list some key notes on designing a good quote-unquote boss encounter. A. Mobs. The boss of the area can be either alone or have other NPCs assisting them when entering combat. These assistants are generally called mobs or mooks, but you can also have objects that function in the same regard. For instance, the boss could have several orbs around the room that give them power, and when those orbs are destroyed, their power will significantly diminish. Whatever the case, try to figure out if the boss is enough of a challenge to tackle alone, or if they need assistance when engaging in battle. For example, wizards and other squishy classes. B. Lethality. A boss NPC should always be harder to defeat than other creatures in the dungeon and could also be strong enough to kill the party. That being said, it does not mean that you have to make them overpowered and unbeatable. Just make sure that they have abilities that will make the party think about their moves in combat strategically. C. Use the environment. Sometimes a boss will be a total pushover if taken out of a certain environment. For example, an NPC whose main advantage is stealth will be greatly weakened in a brightly lit area. As such, make sure that the environment helps them in this regard, and also make sure that this environment can change based on the player's actions. For example, lighting up torches on the walls. D. Alternative solutions. This one isn't mandatory, but it's sometimes nice to have an alternative way of completing the quest other than killing the boss. You should tailor this to the setting and tone of your campaign as well as the general idea on how your party solves problems within the game. If you want the party to still tackle the boss in battle, you can also add alternative solutions to killing them. For example, using an item that could be hidden in a particular part of the dungeon. Once you have considered all of these things, it's time to pick up a pencil or start your map drawing software and map out the areas we discussed in this video. Once that's done, you can start your first session, and I will write a guide on how to handle yourself during that session in the next video. If you like this video, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Remember to click the notification bell so you are notified when the next video drops. Happy GMing!